Thanks. I just want to say thanks for having me out to Ron and to everybody that worked on the show and made the show look great. Thank you. So this image is it's not one of mine. I found this image on the internet, and it's up there for a reason I'll explain. It's difficult. It's often difficult for artists to really know how to talk about their work in depth. I think that's especially true when the work is not kind of conceptually driven at its origin, and I consider mine not to be. I had a professor back in grad school who would talk about painting as being a pre-verbal act, and it was an act that originated without language, and then the trick is afterwards, after the act is done, you go back and you have to figure out how to talk about it. How does that enter into discourse? I think I may go one further than that, and I think I often think about painting as being sometimes pre-verbal thought. It's we think of thought as being very much an activity that's based in language, and that language is essential for thought. And I think I would say that there's a certain kind of thought that can exist without language, and painting is one of the ways that happens. And I think you can look at paintings as being kind of records of that thought, that thought recorded in a way. But then, it still raises the question: how do you discuss that? How do you try to make sense out of these paintings? How do you, bring them into a larger discourse? And I think one of the ways you do that is, you can talk through like analogy and metaphor and example. So this image it's something, that I think everyone's probably familiar with. It's a digital glitch. It's, it's interference of a digital image you get on your TV when there's some kind of interference where the signal's compromised some way. And I think it's interesting because what happens in this image is that kind of slick veneer of like that, clean digital image has broken down, and it's started to reveal this system of which it's composed. And it hints at like this, that the code, the digital code, and the organization of the pixels that make up that image. And it doesn't really, you can't say that it reveals that system in its entirety, but it hints at it. It gives a clue that it's there. And so that it kind of hints at like something more elemental, perhaps. I think that in a lot of ways, I've always seen my work as involving a kind of revealing and concealing in this dynamic. It sometimes will maybe seem like a stretch, particularly I think with the early work that I start to show. But I think we could try to keep this image in mind when we look at that, especially in terms of this early work depicting kind of accidents and transgressions that maybe could be said to hint at something more elemental underlying the situation. So this is an early painting I did when I got to grad school at Cal Arts. And you may not be familiar with it, but Cal Arts is situated in Santa Clarita, which is north of Los Angeles. It's a very new suburban municipality, I guess you could say. It's so new that I think it was established in 1982. So it was interesting to live in a place that was younger than I was. And I think being up there got me started thinking about just like how, the land is used, how kind of the landscape is defined. How something at one point is, it can go from desert to established suburb, instantly almost. I think because of that, I began to be drawn to, going out to the desert. And specifically the kind of desert that's like right on the periphery of Los Angeles. And you get to these places where it's not quite, desert wilderness. It's definitely not the city anymore. There's, lots of activity of, human presence. There's lots of signs of human presence, I should say, out there. But it's still, it's not like really defined as to what those areas are. They're like places that almost have kind of fallen out of like a defined space, it's like a social definition in a way, or not, become established yet. So you see, you see lots of things like shot up road signs, and a lot of like, you'd see like a lot of like vandalized buildings, houses that kind of homesteads that have been like, for whatever reason, become abandoned, and people would go in and tear out all the insides or whatever, strip them for wiring and plumbing. And so I started just like, seeing these things and not like working directly from them, but being inspired by them. I started making these paintings. One of the reasons, aside from what I just mentioned, that was drawing me to this kind of imagery was the potential it seemed to hold for this kind of playing with the materiality of the paint itself. And you have an object that's kind of, been cast off or, exposed to the elements or, smashed by, a vandal or something. It still is a record. It's still an object, but it starts to lose its defining characteristics. It starts to be kind of like an unnamed object. And I thought that was an interesting place to play with the materiality of paint. And so I think you can see it in this painting. There's a good example of that. There are these marks in there that really exist kind of, they exist as paint, as material, but they also hint at an object, a represented object. And what that object is not, quite defined anymore, but you can tell it's supposed to be something, some kind of thing. I gave this talk once, and someone in the audience was apparently really offended about how I painted the toilet down there. They insisted I was, in effect, trying to kind of shove the viewer into the toilet. And that's something I never thought of when I painted it, but I was definitely accused of doing so after the fact. And this is a shot up car. A lot of the stuff when you got, and I think it's anywhere, like kind of any, rural place in the United States. People shoot up stuff. And for whatever reason, I don't know, for something to do, I guess. And for some reason, the desert, just the starkness of the environment, it's really kind of, there's something about that any kind of human presence becomes, very noticeable right away. I was talking with a friend of mine a while ago, and he grew up out there, and he talked about how color becomes a big deal, because any kind of bright color, you tie that immediately to like a human presence, because it just doesn't exist naturally out there. At the same time, when you're out there, people like to throw trash out in the desert a lot, because there's no, people live off in, kind of unserviced areas, and so they don't have like trash trucks driving around. So what happens is people just will find a place and dump all their stuff, like at the end of some dirt road or something, and the wind out there is crazy. So, you have like these, this trash that just blows all over the place. So you'll see like these bits of, bright color kind of, stuck in fences or in barbed wire or whatever. So I was just really kind of interested in that, in this whole phenomenon, this whole kind of type of landscape, and how can I approach that with painting? How can painting, what can painting do with that kind of situation? And I was also at this, and it's, the same kind of thing. This is like this train tunnel full of old beer cans and whatever else. I was asking people, friends of mine about spots that, when they were young and in high school, like where like the kind of kids would go to hang out, these places where like the adults supposedly didn't know about. And one person told me there's like this old train tunnel that everybody used to go in and like drink beer and hang out and whatever. And so I imagined that, and I was doing paintings kind of based off spots like that. This is one of them. This painting was inspired by the Salton Sea in California. I don't know how familiar people out here are with the Salton Sea, but it seems like for a while everybody was making work about it. There's every photographer has had like their photo project based around the Salton Sea, but it's basically, it's like this natural depression out in the desert, and there was a flood back at the kind of turn of the last century, I think, where this agricultural aqueduct overflowed, and it all kind of filled up this natural depression. So it's kind of like this, it has no real natural inlet or outlet, so it kind of is just like this man-made sea, inland lake that isn't supposed to be there. And so the water gets kind of nasty because it's in the desert. It will just evaporate and get more and more saline, and maybe the rain comes and the water level will go up again. And there's these little towns surrounding the sea that at one point people tried to turn into like these resort towns, like these desert, resorts. But the water level kept going up and down, that a lot of them got flooded by this like really kind of almost thick salt water. And so you may have seen like these images of half submerged trailers and cars and buildings, and this was kind of, working off that idea. And then I was also just, kind of interested in the idea of painting an expanse of a desert landscape, with not really any man-made objects per se, but just, this expansive marks receding off in the distance. And at the time, it started to feel really liberating. I think I was starting to get a little frustrated by like a kind of tie to represented objects so much. I think I wanted to break away from this idea of having to paint a thing or a group of things, because I felt when I did that, it started to get very narrative. And I just wasn't that interested in being a narrative painter so much. So this was one of the ways I started to break away from it. It's just like doing these receding fields of vision. The other way was to paint explosions. And it ties back into that same idea of a mark kind of serving a double purpose, as like representing a nameless object and then just being itself too. And it seemed like the idea of an explosion kind of frozen in time seems a really interesting way to play with that and access that idea. And I think around this time I'd seen the film Zabriskie Point by Antonioni, which it's like this 60s kind of counterculture movie, and I can't really recommend anyone see it. I don't think it's that great of a movie, except for like the last 5 minutes. It's just like these really slow motion sequences of kind of objects, household objects, whatever, just being blown up. And he slowed the film down so much that, these things just kind of, things become weightless and they're just hovering in the air. And I always felt that it was interesting that there was something kind of, something like an explosion that's so violent and disruptive, and you kind of slow it down and freeze it in time. And you get this feeling of like the suspension of gravity and almost this euphoric floatiness. And so I was really interested in that too. And this is kind of along the same idea, although this does also, I think this also kind of shows what I was talking about, kind of getting into these narratives, showing like contriving like this implied sequence of events to try to get to a painting, get to a place in painting that I wanted to go. And I think at a certain point I just wanted to go to that place without having to, contrive this implied sequence of events. But, that said, I do really like this painting, and it's, it's like an exploded meth lab or something. I don't know. And then I revisited the car idea. This is the painting version of the image in the print that's downstairs. And it's a slightly different image. With the print, we actually extended that sky up a little higher. So it's less of a square. And in the print, it actually, I think in the painting too, it definitely happens. But in the print, I think you really get like this sense of like this, this effervescent quality. I wanted to get the car to this point where it really started to feel like it was almost dissolving. And I was really interested in this interplay between the bullet holes and the stars. And you had this positive-negative play of space. And, what's taken away, and like what's an addition, what's a subtraction. And kind of confounding that in a sense. And just trying to get like the kind of activate the entire space of the painting that way. I think this image, I think it really starts to get like almost this hallucinatory quality. How the car kind of almost starts to dissolve into the sky and the ground. And I should say, I was also really interested at this time of getting the representational aspect of the painting to reach a precarious point where whatever I was representing, whatever that thing was, whatever that object or space was painted in such a way that it really started to break down and become abstract on a certain level. I started to talk about the representation as being a precarious representation, so that it threatened to kind of fall apart into something else. And I never really thought of myself as an abstract painter. I was never kind of trained, quote unquote, as an abstract painter. But I kept finding myself kind of increasingly drawn in that direction, or what I felt that direction was. Like I didn't really feel like I knew how to make an abstract painting. So, but I kept being drawn to like the more abstract aspects of the work at the time, and kind of convincing myself or finding subject matter that intentionally would push me further in that direction. This painting is called Delta, and it came from an image. I saw this image of Bologna Creek I think the mouth of Bologna Creek in Los Angeles, which is like this. It's kind of like a miniature version of the LA River. It's like a big concrete channel basically, and it flows through like around Culver City and down, and then eventually out to the ocean. And it was a picture of the mouth of Bologna Creek after like the first heavy rain of the year, and those of you who know about this, LA is basically, it was designed for drainage. Like it was designed to avoid flooding because the city has so much concrete in it, and it does get like these heavy kind of these rains, and it used to just create these flash floods that would wreak havoc on the city, and so they as people know, kind of encased the LA River in concrete, and they did that with like a lot of these other smaller channels too. And as the result is, like when you get that first big rain of the year, it pushes out an insane amount of garbage to the beach. So it was a picture of like just like this kind of river of trash kind of flowing out towards the ocean. And they do stop it before it gets out into the oceans. They have like grates and things. But it was just like this crazy image, and I was like, oh, I have to paint something like that. So. That's where this image came from. But you can tell, I mean, it's really just playing with that mark making, that idea of objects or mark making serving a dual purpose of like being itself and creating this kind of sea of unnamed objects. This painting's called Mirage, and it's another attempt at kind of getting away from like that, recognizable thing. It's basically a representational painting where nothing's really represented, or at least nothing recognizable is represented. I mean, there's like some cloud-looking things up at the top, but it's basically, it's a hallucination. Basically, is what it's intended to be. And I also kind of just started making up these imagined structures to shoot holes in. So it's like these kind of paint structures, these kind of image objects that would then go back and paint holes in. This is a similar kind of idea, except it's reversed. It's the idea for this painting I was outside some bar in the desert like one night, and the desert can get like incredibly dark at night, and as some kind of decoration, they'd taken what it turned out was like this dead tree, this dead piece of wood, and wrapped it up in Christmas lights, and it was outside this bar. And I admit I was rather inebriated at the time. But there's like this phenomenon where the surrounding area was so dark, and the lights wrapped around whatever this structure was were so bright that you couldn't really tell what that structure was. All you saw was the shape of lights. So there's like this kind of, the lights were serving to kind of define that form that was holding them up, but it was also concealing it at the same time. And it was this situation that really fascinated me. And it does relate back to like that interaction of that play on space that the bullet holes do, just in the opposite way. And this is a small. All these paintings I should have mentioned before. All these paintings up till now are relatively large paintings. They're on par with the other paintings the paintings that are in the show here. This painting, however, is pretty small. It's about, I'd say, 16 by 14 inches, around that. And it's called Hippie Johnny. And it was kind of just started, I did it as like this experiment. And these vertical stripes, they start reoccurring after this painting a lot. But I just really got into like, this form that kind of occurred. Like people have asked me if like it's meant to be a portrait. I didn't really think of it as a portrait when I made it, but it definitely kind of behaves as one, I think. It kind of presents itself as this presence, this weird presence. I think it's just, it's kind of a funny little painting. But it does kind of these just vertical lines, they start to show up increasingly after this. And this is another play on the idea of the explosion. And this, it's kind of like, it could be like an explosion or like this implosion. It has that kind of sense of implied gravity through negation. This weightlessness. It's like euphoric weightlessness almost. At the time, this was the largest painting I had done. I think it was around 7 by 14 feet. It's still actually kind of up at that upper limit of size I like to work at. And at this point, still kind of thinking about like explosions, collections of objects, but really it's really becoming, a conglomeration of marks at this time, I think. There's still like this sense of some kind of implied gravity, I think, like this kind of, this falling material. On one hand, this painting and the paintings that follow this are, they're made out of just marks of paint. They're very, on one hand, very abstract. At the same time, I think, to me, still, they feel, they're constructed the way one would construct a representational painting. The space in them comes straight out of, how you would paint an illusionistic painting or a representational painting, how you would depict objects. In this case, there's just no object there anymore. And this is another example of the same thing. You still have this this really deep space happening in the paintings. They kind of are, this deep space serves as like this almost like a stage for an unnamed activity, an unnamed event, an unidentifiable event. And again, this work is all from the same show, actually, the past 3 paintings I've shown. I think, this just goes to illustrate that same point. It's kind of these clouds of falling debris. And about this time, I started working on a group of paintings that I think of as the space junk paintings. And for some reason, I just started, it's almost like, a cheesy way of looking at it, but, this deep space that had been in the paintings before, almost like a pun on that, or like taking it too literally and making it like, oh, deep space, with like stars out in the universe, and playing on that, and like, putting like these floating objects in front of it. I guess it was like maybe a literal kind of recognition of what was going on in the work already. At the same time, it was like there's something really kind of, on one hand, playful about this work. It felt like, very much out of science fiction to me. And some of the names like reference like old kind of, B-movie 70s science fiction. not this one, but there's one of them's titled Logan's Run. But at the same time, there's like this, I don't know, this kind of mournfulness to them. And they, they started to almost feel in some aspects like these meditations on mortality in some way. And I wasn't quite sure where that was coming from in the work, but I think it's definitely there. And I was doing these paintings during 2008, 2009, where, the economy was just kind of going through hell. And, I'd been very fortunate coming out of grad school and getting like a good amount of recognition for the work I was doing right away, and it was kind of this crazy time where I was able to make a living off my work, which I never really dreamed would be possible so soon, if at all. And it was just, it's like, this kind of crazy, exciting time where I knew all these other artists were, we all kind of got swept up in like this kind of boom economy and this speculation on younger artists at the time that was happening. And then everything fell apart. And there's like, people are like, oh, what's going to happen? What are we going to do? My people would call up each other. And I remember one time I talked to a friend of mine who was out in New York, and he was like, what's going to happen now? This is what people are saying. People are saying now what you have to do is you have to make small, really brightly colored paintings because people want, things to be really bright and happy, and they're not going to buy anything big. And I was like, uh-oh. Because I'm making these big black paintings, and I think they might be about death, and I don't know how this is going to work out. And but I was just like, I was really into these paintings, and at the same time, there's something about them I think that ties into the economy too, because there was like during that period, those kind of crazy boom years of the real estate bubble and everything, people were like, getting like this crazy amounts of money overnight, and they like really decided it was a great idea to show it off. So everybody, was just like these ostentatious displays of their wealth was happening. You had like all these people walking around with like blingy things, like big sunglasses with diamonds on the side of them and whatever. And I just thought, the whole thing was crazy. And, there's like that kind of, that sparkliness that, I was kind of thinking of that in these paintings too. This painting is called, this painting is called After Forever. This painting is called Debris Field. This painting is called Death Bling. So there you go. This is Logan's Run. Then the same show, I actually included two paintings that weren't like, space junk paintings, but were consisted of going back to that small painting. There's like this kind of just like this vertical almost wall or curtain dropping down, and kind of I started to get interested in like the idea of a curtain or some kind of veil, this not so much putting in like displaying an object in the middle of the painting, but just, having a different layer to it, this kind of curtain that comes down and, alludes to something behind it, but conceals that thing at the same time. This painting is called Kicker, because of that thing coming out. And this is another painting that was in that same show. This painting kind of, I did a series of, or I shouldn't say a series really. I made a group of work that was of icebergs early on, and I think this kind of comes out of that idea of the iceberg. It's kind of like this big mass of matter, frozen matter. And it kind of it started leading to these paintings that, they became like this really heavy, dense central mass, these conglomeration of marks that were coming together, and I was trying. I remember on one hand trying to get them to do something else when they always seem to come back to this space. And I like these paintings a lot. I still like them a lot. But I began to get concerned, like, is this the only painting I can make? Can I only do these paintings with these lots of stuff in the middle? Lots of just marks, object things floating around the middle. And so I was trying to figure out ways to impose a kind of structure on the painting without, reverting back to a representation. And so I had this idea of a painting evolving through its own logic. And I figured, if I made one mark on one side of the painting, and then tried to do that same mark on the other side of the painting, and continued that process back and forth, it's like this internal logic from which the painting could develop. And also, as I soon learned, doing that is really difficult to do, and you're using somewhat gestural marks. It's pretty much impossible to reproduce something exactly, and so you start to get things start to get skewed and thrown off in subtle ways, and you get this painting that implies a symmetry that's not really there, and I got really fascinated by that. These early two paintings that I'm going to show, this one and the next one, you can tell I started to really have a lot of trouble holding that center line. It got difficult to kind of figure out where it was after a while. You can see it on this one too. There's still this implied symmetry there for sure, but it's that center line, exactly where that middle is, it gets really kind of blurry. So I started doing them as diptychs with two separate canvases put together, and that defined that center line. They start to get really kind of they're definitely kind of structural, almost architectural in a way. And they're really interesting to look at. You almost get stuck in this feedback loop because you're trying to make the two sides, match up, and they don't match up. So you look at one side, and you look for that same thing on the other side, and it's kind of there, but it's not there. It's a little bit different. You go back and forth, and you keep trying to, go back and forth between the two sides. And it's kind of, it's like... you get stuck in this oscillation, which I thought was really fascinating at the time. This is another one. I think there's always been some part of my work that's really been interested in the idea of, like I said before, kind of, revealing something and concealing something, and that kind of dynamic. I also think there's this idea of transcendence that I've always been interested in. Maybe not so much that actually happening, but attempts at transcendence. I don't know if they're, and I don't know if an artwork can, be transcendent or cause transcendence. But I think I like to think that one can try, maybe. I don't know. But there's something like these paintings become very meditative, I think, on some level. Maybe not. I think they do. And then, that's funny, I just said that, because then there's paintings that are totally opposite. I also started doing these paintings that I just started calling train wreck paintings, because they felt like train wrecks to me. And this really holds up, to some degree to the paintings I'm still doing. There's 10 paintings there, and none of them went well, I think, in some way. I mean, it's like you can kind of see there are like these kind of background areas that kind of were coming out of those space junk paintings, like these kind of painted lights, and I worked on that for some reason. I didn't like where it was going, and so I decided to do something else. And you can see at one point it was going to be a symmetrical painting, you know, kind of a mirror painting, and I had given, for some reason that didn't work out either. And so it's like this process of going through like all these different ideas and kind of just like, you know, running things into the ground, and like these you know, like 6 paintings kind of piled up on top of each other in a way. And then, you know, and being like, I remember being so frustrated making this work, like just really upset, like how nothing seems right. And then you get to a point and you're like, oh, this is good now. And, you know, that led to like this other level of frustration, which I still deal with, that idea of, you know, artist's intention and the result, you know. There's always, I think there's always some degree of slippage there between, you know, what the artist's idea is and what they actually are able to bring into the world from it. And I think like that kind of slippage is where things get really interesting. At the same time, I think it can be really frustrating because in this case, and in the case of a lot of these paintings I was doing at the time, but the paintings I'm still doing, I have to say, that slippage is huge from like where I start to where I end is, I mean, there's, you know, it's crazy the amount of you know, transitions that happen there. And so, you know, it's hard to start something, you know, almost knowing from the beginning that you're not going to get anywhere close to where you think you're going. This is an example of that. And again, it started to you know, feel so crazy to me. I started naming these paintings after historic train wrecks. I went on the internet and I found like a list of historic train wrecks. So I just started like ticking them off as I'd make a painting that went down this route. This one's not so much in that vein, of course, but it's this kind of vertical kind of play on space, this curtain again. This is another train wreck painting. And this is where the stripes, these patterns of stripes start to come in. It was like a way of trying to figure out something other than like object and space, and try to get something that could maybe be both or neither. And so I figured like these kind of patches of pattern and stripes, you know, they can function as something spatial, but they can pop forward and become kind of an object too, and they get spatially very ambiguous. And so they start to appear in the work more and more at this time. This is another diptych. You can see how they're coming into the work here. Yeah, so this you can see how the stripes are coming in, and I'm trying to like activate things more optically too, and I think on one hand, the diptychs do that a lot, you know, with this kind of this implied symmetry, and then you know, getting the kind of opticality of these patches of pattern in there. Just like I was really just into. I wanted to make the paintings like, you know, kind of just like this phenomena of looking at them. I wanted that to kind of be, in a way, kind of be the point of the paintings. This experience of just looking at these things. And then I just started to, you know, instead of that deep receding space that was, you know, present in the work before, I just, you know, used that pattern instead. And the space really starts to get kind of bizarre. I mean, you can see it on the painting downstairs, I think, which is the next slide, actually. But you know, if you look at that thing for a while, it gets kind of hard to look at after a little while. It starts to vibrate. Things start to shift around. It becomes oppy, you know. And I found that kind of confounding the space that way, that breaking up of the space, having like being able to use that pattern as like space and object simultaneously. I found that really interesting. There's another one. And there's a better version of this downstairs, but I probably didn't even really need to include it. But I think because you can see it downstairs much better. But this painting, I think, is really important because I think it really does a lot of things that were going on in the work all kind of come together in this painting in a way. Yeah, it kind of, I think this painting sums things up very well. And I started to kind of loosen up that strict stripe pattern. I wanted to break that up a little bit. For one reason, is like I just didn't like taping things off that much. But also, it started, it felt like a little formulaic at a certain point, to have like its pattern and then you put something on top of it and it looks crazy and cool. And I wanted to not just rely on that. So things start to get a little less regular. This paint is called Curtain, and it is that idea of this kind of this veil or curtain, this something that, implies space by concealing it, or by, implying something's behind it by concealing it. And this is another diptych. This one's called Texoma. This one I really kind of tried to push that idea of like the implied symmetry that's not there. I mean, it's really kind of wonky. And I think it's a really fun painting for that reason. Like nothing lines up on this painting at all. And then this painting is a good example of this idea of this kind of excavating and scraping down through layers, like these kind of two wet layers of paint on top of each other, and taking some kind of tool and scraping down like large sections of the painting to what's underneath. And that act of scraping through it reveals that previous layer, but it also distorts that previous layer while doing so. And so you get something like something it kind of multiplies things, where you get like a third thing out of like this interaction between two things in a way. And you start to get like, playing with that idea of like a subtractive act, which, reads as an additive act, and the space starts to get activated that way. And that starts to come up in the work more and more. And it really felt like, it was a great way of making paintings to stumble across for me, because, like I'd said before, like these paintings did often feel like train wrecks, and like where things were really pancaked on top of each other, like these paintings had kind of crashed in one on top of the other over and over again, and you were just like in the end left with this kind of mass of stuff. And to be able to like kind of excavate that and bring back certain areas that you'd forgotten about or didn't like, and in a new context, they're amazing. So that's where that really starts to become an important aspect of the work. You can see it in this diptych, and the resolution on that image is not the best, and I apologize for that. I should have used a better file for that, but you can see how, at this point I was really just I was making these paintings and just covering them with a whole, like in this point, I think I made this painting, just covered the whole thing with black and then scraped through it, and almost like that idea of scratch board that kids do in like first grade and kindergarten. Same idea, but with paint. This one too. And you can see here, this one's a pretty stark example. I mean, it's just like these big poles of painting with like drywall knives. And this painting actually was inspired by the old curtains on The Tonight Show, like the Johnny Carson show in the 70s. You had like these curtains, like, they're like yellow and blue and this kind of maroon 70s red. And yeah, that's what got me the idea for that painting. And this is, I probably don't have to say too much about these at this point. And this was started out as a diptych. It's symmetrical diptych. It still is a diptych. But at a certain point, it felt like I knew what was going to happen. You know, I knew where those rules led. You know, that back and forth and reproducing the gesture on one side to the other. It's like I didn't feel like I was going to get to anything new right then by going down that road again. So I deliberately kind of derailed this painting and took it in a different direction. So I think that this last painting, this is the last diptych I've done, I think. Actually, no, there's one more after this that's not included. There's another painting I did after this one that I don't have in here. But I kind of stopped doing these just because they felt like I knew where that was going to go. And I think I'll go back to them at some point, but I have to kind of come around to that again. I have to figure out a new way to get there. So I have to pay attention to the other aspects of the paintings first. And same. This was another kind of started as a diptych and was derailed on purpose and ended up in a different place. And you can see this is that kind of scraping through all these various layers. I think that's really well illustrated in this image. This painting is called Zuma. It was my attempt to make a Zuma beach in Malibu. It's like my favorite beach to go to in the summer. So this was a painting. I was trying to make a beach painting without showing the beach, basically. I wanted it to kind of feel like the beach. I don't know if it works, but I like the painting. This painting is called Drought Survival. Obviously, there's this ongoing drought in California, maybe permanently, who knows? Feels like it. But it's like that idea of this kind of notion of excavating something and digging, and you have this like almost parched surface, and this idea of kind of gouging into it, looking for some kind of moisture or something. I don't know. This one starts to, there's like some of these start to get, these are very recent, they start to get like a little figurative in a weird way, and I can't exactly, the only way I can explain it is to call it like a phantom figuration. There's like some kind of thing there, some kind of figure there that I think is kind of implied but not explicitly shown. I think that starts to come around in these paintings. And this one, again, better version of this downstairs. Yeah, this idea of the laying down of a painting to intentionally cover up and then like excavate back again. This is kind of the first time I put down like this definitive pattern and then like scraped back into it, trying to bring that pattern back. This painting is called Homestead Ghost. It's kind of, I was just reminded of driving through, when I was a kid, like going on road trips with my parents, and you go through this, some field in Colorado where I grew up, or anywhere really, and you see like that abandoned farmhouse or barn off in the field, and it's like, completely, the roof's buckled and it's collapsing, and I always was fascinated by those structures. And I kind of, I wanted to, this painting kind of a structure that started to take place in take shape in this painting started to remind me of that kind of collapse structure. And it's like, you know, it's a stretch to call it like Homestead Ghost, to say this is that, you know, to say this is like a collapsed barn. It's a total stretch. And I realize it's a stretch. And I think it's supposed to be a stretch. Like I want that gap between like the word, the name of something, and this image to be kind of wide. I like the idea that, you know, in order to get from like one to the other, you kind of have to, you know, kind of jump or, you know, contort something somehow. But it's like this idea of like this structure formed through subtraction, you know, this ghostliness, like this ghostly structure, a structure that's, you know, made by its absence, maybe, by paint that's taken away. And these are all from my most recent show that was in New York back in November. So they're all kind of along the same lines, I think. So I'm not going to talk too much for the rest. I think this is like the last or second to last image, actually. So I'm going to go through these kind of quick. So if there's any questions, we have time for those, hopefully. And again, better version downstairs. I think that's the last one.